Many thanks to Jerb, Speeder Gaming, Jaren, DayZ Podcast, Taggies Tag West, and that one random for making this video possible. The DayZ damage system has just received its biggest update in years by introducing weapon damage based on the weapon you're using across all weapons, which means the AK-74 will do more damage than the AKS-74U, the sawed-off Mosin will do less damage than the regular Mosin, and weapons like the LAR and SVD have had a damage nerf. So in this video I'm going to detail how the damage system works now, give you the damage values for all weapons in DayZ, and even tell you which distance these weapons will one-shot players at. If you didn't know, damage in DayZ is strongly determined by the speed a bullet hits its target. The slower the bullet is travelling, the less damage it does. Now in patch 1.12, the devs have changed the speed a bullet travels based on the weapon you're using for all of the weapons in DayZ, meaning the weapon you use changes the speed a bullet will travel, which in turn determines damage, making different weapons in DayZ with the same ammo type do different amounts of damage, and as an end result, makes the ballistic system in DayZ more realistic. However, because damage in DayZ works like this now, there's no fixed damage values that I showed earlier for point blank range, because as you can see between the M4A1 and the Pioneer rifle here, which uses the same ammo type by the way, the Pioneer rifle one-shots where the M4A1 does not. This is because the speed of the bullet travelling from the M4A1 is slower than the speed of the bullet travelling from the Pioneer rifle. So at point blank range, the M4A1 does 96 damage, where the Pioneer rifle does 110 damage. The only other weapon to use a 5.56 round is the AK-101, which has the exact same damage as the M4A1. So as we can see here, both the M4A1 and AK-101 do 96 health damage, but because they also do 96 shock damage to an unarmoured player in the chest, they will become knocked out from 220 meters away in one shot to the chest, as long as they're not wearing armor. Basically, the M4 and the 101 will one-shot a player up to 220 meters away if you hit them in the chest. They won't one-shot KO a target beyond this range because bullets slow down while travelling through the air, and as I said earlier, the slower a bullet travels, the less damage it does. As for the Pioneer, otherwise known as the Scout Rifle, because it has a faster bullet speed, it will one-shot kill a player up close and one-shot KO a target up to 430 meters away, making the Scout a superior weapon for sniping over the M4 and the AK-101, which is the way it should be. Moving on to the AK-74, it now does 80 health damage and 90 shock damage and can one-hit KO up to 100 meters, where the AKS-74U now does 64 health damage and 72 shock damage. Not enough to one-shot a player because you need to inflict 75 shock damage to KO a player. This means the AK-74 does roughly 25% more damage than the AKS-74U, a significant difference. Next is an interesting ammo type because it's used by so many weapons, the 7.62x3.9s. Surprisingly, the AKM does less damage than the M4 and the AK-101, but is still enough to one-shot KO a player at 110 meters. The SKS holds its bullet speed for longer over the AKM and does full damage up close and can one-shot KO from 300 meters. The CR527 is slightly better here, one-shotting at 60 meters more than the SKS. The BK-18's bullet speed is much slower, resulting in 200 meters for a one-shot KO, whereas if you saw this weapon off, it would no longer do enough damage to one-shot a player at any distance, unless you're going for a headshot. This makes sawed-off weapons even worse than they were before this patch, and in my opinion not worth using at all because the damage reduction is just not worth it. Onto the first of the sniper rounds, the 7.62x5.4s allow you to one-shot a player beyond the maximum viewing distance, which is around 1100 meters, making it extremely powerful at range. However, when you saw it off, the Mosin will do less health and shock damage up close, but will still be able to one-shot KO up to 600 meters. The only other gun that uses this ammo type is the SVD, which does less damage, but is still capable of one-shotting at 1100 meters plus. The 308s fired by the Winchester and Blaze do the same health and shock damage as the Mosin, and will perform very well at range too. However, the LAR or FN FAL does less damage up close, but like the SVD will still one-shot KO a target beyond the maximum viewing distance. The nerf to the LAR and SVD means that you will need an extra shot to kill someone that has plate carrier armor on compared to the Winchester, Blaze and the Mosin, but they all require one shot to KO targets with armor anyway, so there's no real difference between these weapons. The 9x3.9s and armor piercing variants of these rounds fired by the VSS and the ASVAL would do roughly the same damage, but the armor piercing rounds do more damage versus armor. Nonetheless, this weapon will not one-shot KO like most of the other rifles do in DayZ. Moving on to shotguns, the BK-43 and BK-133 do the exact same damage, and with the buckshot, because it's buffed slightly, will one-shot a player at 25 meters now. The sawed-off version of the BK-43 is half that at 13 meters, and the Vega is somewhere in between at 19 meters. That means there's a difference between the Vega, the sawed-off version, and the BK-43/133. Slugs for the shotguns give you a better idea of how damage is different among shotguns now, with the 43 and 133 capable of KOing a target up to 50 meters now, and the sawed-off version again lacking at just 13 meters to KO a target with the slugs, but the Vega is twice that at 25 meters. Which means the Vega does less damage than the regular BK-43 and BK-133 when using buckshot, slugs, or rubber shells. Speaking of rubber shells, these shells lose speed so rapidly in this patch that KOing a target at any range is very difficult now, flying roughly 5 times slower in this patch compared to 1.11, so unless you're a geometry genius, hitting anything past 20 meters is going to be very difficult with the rubber shells, and that's not even considering how quickly the rubbers lose shock damage over distance. Onto the lower caliber rounds now, starting with the 45s. Basically the UMP does slightly more damage than the FNX and 1911, which have the exact same bullet speed. The 357s have more variety now. The repeater can one-shot up to 240 meters due to the shock damage of these rounds, and the Deagle can one-shot quite far too at 170 meters, but note how the Deagle does slightly less damage up close compared to the repeater. The Magnum on the other hand does a lot less damage than these two, 53 health damage per shot and 73 shock damage per shot, meaning you will need 2 shots with this weapon to down a target. Surprisingly, the 9mm do more damage than the 45s now with this new damage system, which will probably get fixed because the 9mm will now 2-shot KO a target, where the 45s require 3 shots. The 380s have a buff too, capable of 2-shot KOing a target with the Scorpion, or just 3 shots to kill them with this weapon, which means it's the same as the 9mm. However, the IJ-70 has slightly less damage, but is still deadly in this patch. An ammo type with damage that has little to no change in this patch are the 22s, requiring 4 shots to KO a target and 5 shots to kill with both the Sporter and the MK2. The takeaway from this, if you are going into 1.12, are it's going to take fewer shots to down a player in this patch, but with most weapons you will need to get closer to the target to do more damage than in 1.11, and when you do down a player, most of the time they will become knocked out instead of simply dying, so you will need to make sure to finish off your enemies in this patch, because if you don't, the people that you just killed are going to get back up and they're going to kill you right back. In other news, out of the 70 people that support me on Patreon and YouTube members, Scalespeeder Gaming was the winner of the DayZ plus Livonia giveaway. Congratulations, Scalespeeder Gaming. Thank you very much for watching. Thanks again to Mike for the clips, and good luck in patch 1.12.